You ever notice how some sounds just get under your skin? Not in an annoying way. More like they find a little hiding spot in your bones and stay there. For James, that sound was the cadence. Not singing it, not hearing it from across the parade ground, dreaming it. That's where this story really starts. Not with a screaming tourist or a drop water bottle or any of those viral videos you've seen 100 times. It starts at 2:47 on a Tuesday morning in a narrow barracks bed that smelled of boot polish and cheap laundry detergent. James was 23, been a Royal Guard for just over 2 years. Not a long time, not a short time. Long enough that the bearskin didn't feel like a furry torture device anymore. Short enough that his mom still cried every time she saw a photo of him online. He'd had the dream before. Lots of them do, though nobody talks about it. You fall asleep, and your brain just keeps marching. Left, 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 right, left. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't just hearing the rhythm. He was in it. The boots weren't his boots. The ground wasn't pavement or gravel. It was something older. Something wet and soft, like mud that hadn't seen sunlight in 100 years. And there were voices. Not the living kind. He woke up gasping, sat bolt upright in his bunk, sweat cold on his neck, and for a solid 5 seconds he had no idea where he was. The room was dark except for the orange glow of a street lamp bleeding through the thin curtains. His roommate, a bloke named Davies who snored like a broken lawnmower, hadn't stirred. James put a hand to his chest. His heart was slamming. Left, 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 right, left. The cadence was still there, fading now, like an echo in a tunnel, but real enough that he almost opened his mouth to answer it. He didn't sleep again that night. The next morning was gray. The kind of London gray that doesn't threaten rain, but just sits there. Heavy, patient. Tourists shuffled through the gates of St. James's Palace with their umbrellas folded and their hopes high. A group of American teenagers took turns pretending to salute the empty sentry box. A French couple argued quietly about which way led to Buckingham. A little girl in a red coat dropped her ice cream and cried for exactly 4 seconds before her dad bought her another one. Normal. Everything looked normal. James took his post at 10:47. The changing of the guard wasn't for another hour, so the crowd was thin. A few early birds with expensive cameras. A retired teacher from Manchester who came every Tuesday just to watch the soldiers move. She always stood in the same spot, near the railing, wearing the same navy blue raincoat. James had seen her maybe 30 times. They'd never spoken. That was the rule, after all. Don't move. Don't smile. Don't blink if you can help it. Be a statue in a fur hat. But statues don't have dreams. He stood there, feet together, rifle resting, eyes fixed on a point somewhere between the 4th and 5th lamppost across the courtyard. His jaw was tight. His stomach was still churning from the night before. Left, 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 right, left. There was again. Not loud. Not even real, probably. Just a ghost of a memory from the dream. But his left foot twitched. Just a millimeter. Just enough that his own shadow might have noticed. Nobody else did. For the next 45 minutes, nothing happened. A pigeon landed on the railing, stared at him, and flew off. A delivery van backed up, beeping somewhere behind the palace walls. The retired teacher shifted her weight from one foot to the other and checked her watch. Then the crowd started to thicken. That's the thing about royal landmarks. 1 minute you're alone with your thoughts. The next you're surrounded by 50 strangers, all holding their phones at arm's length like they're offering them to the gods. James kept breathing, slow and steady. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The cadence had faded again, replaced by the real sounds of London. Buses, seagulls, a street performer warming up on a saxophone a few blocks away. He was fine. He was a professional. He'd done this hundreds of times. But something felt different. It wasn't the crowd. It wasn't the weather. It was the weight of the dream. Like someone had poured concrete into his chest while he slept. He couldn't shake it. Couldn't explain it. And the more he tried to push it away, the louder the marching got. Left, 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 right, left. Not in his ears. In his blood. By noon, the main courtyard was packed. The ceremony hadn't even started, and already people were 3 rows deep, children on shoulders, elbows out, the whole circus. James could see the new guard forming up in the distance, red coats bright against the gray stone. The band was tuning up. A sergeant was barking orders somewhere out of sight. And then James saw the man, mid-40s, unshaven, wearing a wrinkled hoodie and carrying a backpack that looked too heavy for his frame. He wasn't watching the soldiers. He was watching the crowd, not in a curious way, in a calculating way. His eyes moved slow, like he was counting heads, measuring distances. James noticed him the way soldiers notice things, not with a turn of the head or a shift of the eyes. Just a quiet, internal flag. That one. Keep an eye. The man started moving, not toward the palace, toward the little girl in the red coat, the one who dropped her ice cream earlier. She was standing near the railing now, holding her father's hand, sucking on a lollipop that was already melting down her chin. The man stopped about 10 feet from her, reached into his backpack. James's grip on his rifle tightened, just a little, just enough that his knuckles went white under the white gloves. Don't move. Don't move. Don't move. The man pulled out a bottle of water, took a drink, zipped the backpack back up. Then he just stood there, staring at the little girl. Not smiling, not frowning, just staring. James couldn't say anything, couldn't warn anyone. That wasn't his job. His job was to stand there and look impressive and trust that the police officers scattered through the crowd were doing their jobs. But the police were watching the ceremony, like everyone else. And the cadence was back. Left, 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 right, left. Louder this time. So loud it felt like the ground was vibrating. James could see the faces in the crowd blurring together. The red coats of the approaching guard looked like smears of paint. The only clear thing in the whole world was the man in the hoodie and the little girl in the red coat. Tom didn't slow down. That's not how it works. But something shifted. Something clicked into place. And then the man started walking toward her. Part 2 the crack in the statue, his name was Michael. Not that anyone in the crowd knew that. Not that James knew that. But we'll call him Michael because that's what the police report said later, and because every story deserves a name, even the ones that scare you. Michael had been fine once. Or fine enough. A job. A flat. A girlfriend who laughed at his jokes. But things had gone sideways in the way that things do when you stop taking your medication and start believing that the news anchors are speaking directly to you. He'd been wandering London for 3 days, slept in a bus shelter, ate day-old pastries from a bakery bin, and somewhere in the fog of his own head, he decided that the Royal Guard was a symbol, not of Britain, not of history, of control. And the only way to break control was to do something that couldn't be ignored. He didn't have a weapon. That's the part the papers got wrong. He had a broken phone charger, a paperback novel with half the pages torn out, and a bottle of water. But he had his hands, and his hands, wrapped around the wrist of a little girl in a red coat, would be enough. He was 3 steps away from her when James moved. It wasn't dramatic, not in the way movies make it. There was no slow-motion leap, no heroic jet. James just stepped forward. 1 step, that's all it took. His left boot hit the pavement with a sound that echoed off the palace walls like a gunshot. The crowd didn't notice at first. They were watching the band, which had just started playing something upbeat and brassy. But the retired teacher noticed. She'd been watching James for years. She'd never seen him move during a ceremony. Ever. Her hand went to her mouth. James took another step. Then another. His rifle was still at his side, but his posture had changed. He wasn't a statue anymore. He was a soldier. And soldiers don't wait for permission. The man in the hoodie, Michael, saw him coming. Stopped. Turned. For a second, their eyes met. And here's the thing nobody tells you about moments like this. The thing that doesn't make it into the news reports or the viral videos. James wasn't thinking about duty. He wasn't thinking about the Queen or the palace or the 200 years of history on his shoulders. He was thinking about his little sister. Her name was Chloe. She was 7 years old, and she wore a red coat exactly like that one. She lived with their mom in a small flat in Manchester, and every night before bed, she made James promise to come home safe. He hadn't seen her in 4 months. Michael was 6 feet from the little girl now. James was 10 feet from Michael. The crowd was starting to murmur. Someone gasped. A phone clattered to the ground. The band kept playing Oblivious, Happy Bright. James opened his mouth. Now, you have to understand how strange this was. Royal Guards don't talk on duty. They don't shout. They don't interact with the public except in the most extreme circumstances. And even then, the protocol is clear. Hold your ground. Wait for the police. Don't escalate. But James had been dreaming in marching cadence for 3 nights straight. And somewhere in those dreams, between the mud and the old voices, he'd learned something. Something that didn't come from any training manual. Sometimes the only way to protect is to move. Stop. Just one word. Quiet. Almost gentle. But it cut through the brass and the chatter and the wind like a blade. Michael stopped. The little girl looked up. She didn't understand what was happening. Her father was still holding her hand, but he was looking at his phone, answering a work email, completely unaware that his daughter had been 3 seconds from a stranger's grip. James took another step. He was close enough now to see the cracks in Michael's shoes, the tremor in his hands, the wetness in his eyes. "Step back," James said. Still quiet, still calm, but different now, firmer. The voice of someone who had marched through mud and darkness and old dreams and come out the other side. Michael's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. And then the strangest thing happened. The marching cadence that had been living in James's head for days, the left, 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 right, left that had haunted his sleep and his waking hours, it didn't fade. It didn't get louder. It changed. It became words. I don't know, but I've been told someone's heart is growing cold sound off, 1, 2 sound off, 3, 4. He'd never heard those words before. Not in training. Not from any of the old sergeants. But they were in his mouth now, and they wanted out. He didn't sing them. He whispered them, so low that only Michael could hear. And Michael started to cry. Later, the psychologist would say it was a pressure release. That Michael had been wound so tight for so long that any unexpected stimulus, a kind word, a strange sound, a soldier whispering a lullaby cadence in the middle of a tourist crowd, could have broken the spell. But James didn't believe in psychology that day. He believed in the dream, the one with the mud and the old voices, the one that had been trying to tell him something. "Sit down," James said. Not an order, an invitation. Michael sat, right there on the wet pavement, in the shadow of the palace, with tourists parting around him like water around a stone. He put his head in his hands, and he sobbed. Ugly, gasping, honest sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. The little girl's father finally looked up, saw the man on the ground, saw the royal guard standing over him like a red-coated oak tree, pulled his daughter close, and backed away. Police arrived 20 seconds later. They always do at the end of stories like this. But by the time they got there, the danger was already gone. Not because James had stopped Michael with force, but because he'd stopped him with something else. A rhythm, a memory, a dream. Part 3, the cadence remains. They didn't discipline James. That's the part that surprised him most. For 3 days, he waited for the knock on the door, the summons to an office with a stern-faced major and a formal letter of reprimand. He'd broken protocol. He'd left his post. He'd spoken to a civilian without authorization. But the knock never came. Instead, his sergeant pulled him aside after morning formation. Older bloke, gray at the temples, had seen things in Northern Ireland that he never talked about. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. The CCTV footage, the sergeant said, shows you stepping off your mark at 12:03 and 22 seconds. You advanced approximately 8 meters. You issued 2 verbal commands. You remained within the operational boundary the entire time. James waited. Nobody's filing a report, the sergeant said. The police handled the civilian. The family sent a letter of thanks. And the palace, he paused. Rub his chin. The palace is calling it an exemplary display of judgment under pressure. James blinked. "Sir, don't sir me like that. You know you got lucky." "Yes, sir." The sergeant looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something James had never seen him do. He smiled. Just a small one. Just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. "The dreams stop eventually," he said. "Mostly." And then he walked away. That night, James lay in his bunk and stared at the ceiling. Davies was snoring. The street lamp was glowing. Everything was the same, as it had been 3 nights ago, except nothing was the same at all. He thought about Michael, about the way he'd crumbled, about the sound he'd made, like a building finally giving way after years of standing crooked. He wondered if Michael was okay, if they'd found him a bed somewhere, a warm meal, a doctor who listened. He thought about the little girl, about her red coat, about his sister, Chloe, who was probably asleep in Manchester right now, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear chewed off. He thought about the cadence, the one that had whispered itself into his dreams, the one that had turned into words at exactly the right moment. I don't know, but I've been told someone's heart is growing cold. He'd never told anyone about that part. Not the sergeant, not the police, not even Davies, who was a good bloke, but talked too much after a pint. Some things you keep. He closed his eyes, waited for the marching to start. But the barracks were quiet. The night was still. And for the first time in days, James felt something he hadn't felt since before the dreams began. Peace. Not the loud kind. Not the kind that comes with cheering crowds, or medals, or viral fame. The quiet kind. The kind that settles into your chest like warm tea on a cold morning. He fell asleep without meaning to. And this time, there were no cadences. No muth. No old voices. Just a long, dark, dreamless rest. The next morning was sunny. The kind of London sunny that makes everyone forget about the gray. Tourists flooded the courtyard with fresh eyes and fresh phones. A new guard took the post. A new crowd gathered at the railings. James wasn't on duty that day. He had a pass, so he walked across Green Park, bought a coffee from a cart, and sat on a bench near the lake. A swan drifted past. A jogger waved. A toddler threw bread at some ducks and screamed with joy when they actually ate it. He pulled out his phone, scrolled past the news notifications, saw a headline about Michael, man detained near Buckingham Palace receiving mental health support, and felt something loosen in his chest. Then he called his mom. She answered on the second ring. "Jamie, is everything okay?" "Yeah, Mom. Everything's fine. You sound different." "Doi. You sound lighter." He watched the swan paddle in lazy circles. Watched the toddler chase a pigeon. Watched the palace in the distance, red and gold and impossibly old, standing exactly where it had always stood. "I think I figured something out," he said. "What's that, love?" He thought about the cadence, about the dreams, about the moment he'd stepped off his mark and into something he still couldn't quite explain. "Sometimes you have to move," he said, "even when they tell you to stand still." His mom was quiet for a second. Then she laughed. That warm, crinkly laugh she'd had his whole life. "That sounds like something your father would have said." James smiled. "Yeah, maybe." They talked for a while after that. About Chloe's school play. About the leaky faucet in the kitchen. About nothing and everything. Normal stuff. The kind of stuff that keeps you grounded when the dreams get strange. And when he hung up, he sat there for a long time just breathing. Just being. Just a soldier on a bench, watching the world turn. He never dreamed in marching cadence again. But sometimes on quiet nights when the barracks were asleep and the city was soft, he'd hear it. Not in his head, not in his bones, in his heart. Left, 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 right, left. And he'd smile.